Those children and adults, they usually have symptoms very similar to an actual hearing loss. They have difficulty processing degraded speech and language.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another podcast episode. We're glad that you're tuning into this. I'm very excited to introduce our next guest. It is none other than Trume van Heerden. She is the owner of A Beautiful Sound Audiology in KZN, and she's got a keen interest in central auditory processing disorders, but she works with children population and then geriatric population. She's got a wide range of areas that she is interested in, but the most prominent and the one that she loves, and I am so thankful for her that she's doing this work, is central auditory processing disorder. But Trume, please tell us a bit more about yourself and your clinical areas of expertise.
Hi, Sabra, thank you so much for having me. I started this auditory processing journey in 2011. And it has been such a learning curve for me as well. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I knew. So yes, it's been a learning curve, and I've just loved the journey so far.
I'm curious, did you out of varsity know that that's the area that you wanted to focus on, and subsequently as you established your own practice, that is what you wanted to do? Was it a case of just immersing yourself in a bit of the research, or did you do extra courses on it?
Sabra, so I didn't really know this was an area that I wanted to actually pursue. It kind of just fell into my lap, to be quite honest. At that stage, I had a practice in the Bluff, and I was seeing so many young children where teachers referred them for a hearing test, and then we would see that there was absolutely no hearing loss. But there were so many symptoms similar to hearing loss. Then I started digging into auditory processing. It was definitely a module that was done in varsity, but I went to varsity many years ago. I think I started varsity 24 years ago. So yes, since then, I think research has just evolved with regards to auditory processing. Yes, I did do a whole bunch of courses just to educate myself. And I bought textbooks, educational audiology textbooks, Terry Bellis's her textbook with regards to auditory processing. She's one of the big names, her and Dr. Janan Ferry. So yes, I had to learn in the field as I went along.
Just want to echo my words that I said in the beginning. And, it's really nice to see someone like you that's got a passion for it. But I really do appreciate, as an audiologist myself, I appreciate the work that you do, especially with children. It's obviously emotionally always I don't want to say difficult population to work with, but in a way it is, because you always want the best for them and want to make sure that they've got a good quality of life. What I find interesting is you mentioned to me that, we obviously find adults as well that have a central auditory processing disorder. How would you generally know for a child what the symptoms would be? And for an adult, how would you know what the symptoms are if there's public watching this?
I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a little bit of an explanation. So there are more than one auditory processing deficit, and each one of those are connected, I want to say, to dysfunction in a specific area of the brain, specific to the auditory system. The very first one, if I can just simplify it, we've got a left hemisphere deficit, which is a sound discrimination deficit. Secondly, we've got an integration deficit, and that is more your corpus callosum. That's a lot of information. I'm not going to go into detail with regards to that. And then you've got a right hemisphere deficit, which is a prosodic deficit. Now, your decoding deficit, your sound discrimination deficit, is the most, I want to say, the purest form of auditory processing, or an auditory processing deficit. Those children and adults, they usually have symptoms very similar to an actual hearing loss. Now, when I say a sound discrimination difficulty, these children and adults, they have difficulty processing degraded speech and language, for example. And if you think about it, we are in degraded environments or listening environments all the time. There's always background noise, or 90% of the time, there's going to be some form of background noise. Back in the day when we wore masks, that was a form of speech, degraded speech and language. Even if you think about a classroom environment, if the teacher turns her back towards the class, working on a blackboard, for example, and talking, that's a form of degraded speech and language. The children with the decoding deficit would keep asking, and adults, they would battle to hear in these environments. They would ask for repetition all the time. Very often they will do a lot better in the morning than later in the day as a result of auditory fatigue. Their memory is affected negatively because they have to work so hard to process the speech and language that is degraded. Very often they have inaccurate language processing. So they'll hear sit for fit or moon for noon and so forth. So that is your decoding deficit. Your integration deficit, that is difficulty with synthesizing or bringing together. Is it Dr. Janan Ferry? She uses the example, was it at or act? It's the same sounds, but when you put them together, it's two different words with two different meanings. These kids very often have sound simple relationship difficulty. So they have difficulty connecting the auditory sound with the visual symbol, which is the alphabet, for example, which makes it a little bit tricky in our English language, is that we've got the same symbols with different sounds attached to it, like cat and car, if you think about the A sound. And then we've got the same or different symbols with the same sound. Like if we use the word alphabet, there we've got an F in the middle, or a F sound, and then a word like fast. It's two different symbols. So these kids usually have difficulty synthesizing, putting things together. Very often in the classroom, you'll see they may have delays in actually starting with a task, and they might not complete it in time. And that's pretty much, very often there's extreme delays with them responding to information as well, and that's spoken information. Lastly, we've got the prosodic deficit, which is really the music behind language. Or pragmatic part of language. So I'm going to give you an example. If I say, look out the window versus look out the window, it's the same language, but we've got two different communication intents. So yes, it goes even a little bit deeper than that with regards to prosodic. But yes, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I hope that gives you a little bit of an overview of what you can expect with regards to auditory processing or the different deficits that you get. There's actually two secondary auditory processing deficits as well. So they are not true central auditory processing deficits, but they involve the auditory system quite a bit. So they've been included. The one is called organizational output deficit, and the other is called an associative deficit. So organizational output, if you think about a good listener will detect and collect sound with the peripheral system. And then everything from there that happens central is the sound discrimination, the integration, putting the communication intent together with that. And then there's the language association that is added. And then eventually there's a response, and that output can be, I'm going to laugh at the joke, or I'm going to answer the question, complete the task. Those kids with an organizational output difficulty, they've got difficulty forming a response to input. Very often, if you tell those kids a story and you ask them to, tell the story back, it comes out completely disorganized. Lastly, we've got the associative deficit, and that's really a language association difficulty. So those kids and adults, they've got usually have difficulty understanding ambiguous language or abstract language. There is a little bit of an overview.
With looking at those categories, it's such a vast area to cover. And so I think that's also, oftentimes these children are also misunderstood because it is also such a mysterious area to look into. Just out of interest, say, Trume, when you do an evaluation, APD evaluation, that's auditory processing disorder, if you do that evaluation, do you cover all of that ground in one session? Or how does it typically look if somebody comes to you and it's suspected that they may have APD?
Depending on the child, I try to break it up into 2 sessions because it's quite a lot of work to cover. The very first thing I obviously have to do is we have to assess the peripheral hearing system just to make sure there's no hearing loss or middle ear issue that might be interfering with assessment results. But directly after we've tested the outer ear, middle ear, inner ear, and we can see that that's absolutely fine, that's when we start with everything central. And what we basically do is we do a whole list of assessments where the auditory system is put under pressure. So we almost overwork the auditory system to assess integrity thereof. So, for example, the child will be asked, or the adult for that matter, will be asked to repeat words that he's hearing in the presence of background noise. Or we will put a target in one ear and a different target in the other ear and ask them to repeat both of them. Or we'll put a sentence in the one ear, a different sentence in the other ear, and we'll ask them to ignore one side and just repeat what's heard in the other side. So there's a whole list of assessments that is done. And afterwards, when we interpret results, we have to find a pattern. I need normal results and I need abnormal results. So if it is a true central auditory processing deficit, let's say, for example, it's a sound discrimination deficit, I need to see all the assessment that taps into sound discrimination has been failed, but everything that taps into integration or prosodic skills needs to be absolutely age appropriate. It is not a true central auditory processing deficit or disorder, as they call it, if there is fails everywhere. If they failed the entire assessment, then we have to look into it a little bit more and find out exactly what's happening. There's a saying, teamwork makes the dream work. We are actually a whole bunch of colleagues that usually assess the same child. It's usually the educational psychologist that refers here for further testing. Sometimes it's the teacher, sometimes it's the mom, but usually it's the educational psychologist. So we've got such a lovely team with a vast amount of members. We've got a whole bunch of speech language therapists working together, a whole bunch of occupational therapists working together, and then the teacher and the parents also forms an integral part of this team.
That's really interesting. And I think the other thing is, can you maybe just give an idea how often it's happened that you've seen children or maybe adults as well that has been misdiagnosed with some form of attention deficit disorder, and then it ended up being an auditory issue?
Yes, Sabran, that happens often. Very often a CAPD, that's short for Central Auditory Processing Deficit, can mimic symptoms of ADD and ADHD. So when we look at the diagnostic criteria of ADD or ADHD in the DSM, we see many similarities commonly found in CAPD. So it's a little bit more difficult to differentiate between CAPD in attention, specifically the inattentive type. And that's mainly because the behavioral symptoms are so similar. So there are, however, diagnostic indicators in ADD, the inattentive type, that is not common in CAPD. And just to give you an example of one or two, and that is forgetting routine activities, losing items, difficulty with self-control. Those are not common in a CAPD.
Looking at brain functioning specifically and how that relates to auditory cognition, and you've got an interest definitely in brain functioning and how that relates to our profession. Looking at the other areas of your audiology practice, you definitely have a focus on brain health, right?
Absolutely, Sabrant. And as much as I love working with the pediatric population, I enjoy just as much working with the geriatric population. My oldest patient was 107, but sadly she passed away. So yes, now I'm waiting for the next patient that is 107.
Trume, that's amazing. I think there's going to be a lot of people watching this and thinking, I wonder what was the contribution that Trume had in this lady becoming 107 years old. Did you fit her with hearing devices?
I did. And I actually want to tell you a story about that. I'm not so sure. I won't mention the medical aid. So what happened with this patient, James, she was 99 and she came for a hearing test, and she wasn't a fantastic candidate for hearing aids because it would have helped her very little, but I wanted to fit her with hearing aids anyway, just for the brain stimulation. We all know that works against dementia and so forth. Phoned her medical aid, and they told me that she had to wait for 3 years before they would consider. Now, just keep in mind that before that, she never had hearing aids. She did wait for 3 years. So when she was just before her 103rd birthday, she came. And sadly, by that time, her speech discrimination results were just too poor. Hearing aids were going to help so little. So I explained this to her daughter, but she insisted that I fit her mom with hearing aids because she had waited for 3 years to actually get those hearing aids. In the end, I was very grateful that I did, because it did make a difference in her, just in her quality of life.
That's wonderful. I often see patients as well that will say to me, why do I have to get hearing devices if they're older? And they usually say, how much time have I got left? And it's so nice, that story as well, because it's always, doesn't matter what age you are, it's all about quality of life and what you can get out. Specifically, if you're that old, communication and being a part of conversations and so forth. You guys have 3 kids as well. And so, Trume, how do you do it? Tell us a bit, how do you work in this field? Because we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, just off air, and it's emotionally draining and can take its toll. How do you make sure that you keep yourself emotionally healthy? And how do you juggle work environment and then your family environment as well? Because you've got 3 ones at home.
That is very difficult. That's very, very difficult. So yes, I must say, working with children, it's really, really hard work. I don't even know how to answer it. I am just so grateful. It's by the grace of God that I can do it. I'm in a very fortunate position where I can also, as I'm my own boss, I can take some time off to go and watch a soccer match or a rugby match or a swimming competition. So in that regard, I'm very, very fortunate. I also work from home. I've got an outbuilding that is far enough from my home to be able to be away from home, but also at home. So this is a family practice. So as a result, I want people and families to feel welcome. And if they've got children, bring them with. Very often, parents will bring children with, or, parents will bring their adult children and their grandchildren to a consultation or to a hearing test. I feel the more the merrier. And it's very nice if the family can also understand, especially if someone's got a hearing loss, just to understand from someone objectively, just giving them a little bit of a view into this person with the difficulty, their journey that they are going through. So sometimes I feel a little bit like a psychologist or a counselor. But yes, juggling my family with work, I'm very fortunate that very often my children will just come to the practice, and so far it has been welcoming. Or my patients has welcomed them. Let's just say that.
That's really interesting, Trume. That I did not know that you've got. That you've got it so close to home. But it's really nice. I think it's in any case valuable advice that yes, you're a practice owner, so it's a bit more easy, but that you allow yourself to have those times that you can take off. And like you mentioned, go and watch a sporting event of your children or so forth. That's really good advice that you allow yourself that as well. What I want to know from you now is what's been a defining moment for you a defining moment that caused you to think, this is what I want to do with my life. Audiology is the profession that I want to be in. So a defining moment that you can think of that really motivated you to keep carrying on in this profession.
I was 10 when I knew I wanted to be an audiologist, and I cannot tell you why. There was no one in my family with a hearing loss. I had a brother who really battled in school, and I used to be almost like his little teacher, trying to help him all the time, help him study, help him. And it was so interesting at that stage, back in the day, they did have educational psychologists. He went to all the assessments, but nobody could figure out why this child was battling in school, because IQ was absolutely fine. There was no difficulty that they could pick up. When I was 10, I wrote a letter to DEFSA, so it's Deaf South Africa, and I asked them if there was anything that I could do at the age of 10 to start this journey. And they actually wrote back. They wrote back and they said, there's nothing that I can do at the moment, but just hold on to that passion. So for me, it wasn't a difficult decision when I was in standard 9, or today's words, grade 11. I went again to those educational psychologists that assess you to see what you are supposed to be. They told me that I could be anything, which didn't really help. But they also said I should consider being a math or science lecturer. I'm very glad I didn't do that. I just knew I wanted to be an audiologist. So straight out of school, went and started this journey at the University of Pretoria.
I think the audiology world can be very thankful that you already had that passion at 10 years old. I cannot believe that, Trume. That is an amazing story. And, I suppose, like you mentioned now, you could have, what did they just mention again? They said you can be a scientist. Was that one of the...
A lecturer, a varsity science lecturer or math lecturer. Yes.
And now look at you working with the brain and all the intricacies and mysteries of the brain. So we touched briefly on the topic of hearing devices earlier on, and I wanted to know from you, just to get an idea from you, the audiological landscape globally is changing, and there's the advent of over-the-counter hearing aids and so forth. What's your take on it, Trume? What's your feeling with where we are poised as independent audiologists? And secondly, on top of that, how do you see the future and the importance of independent audiologists in South Africa?
Abraham, how much time do you have? So first of all, yes, the landscape is changing and it is a little bit scary, but I guess change is the only constant. I am not so concerned about over-the-counter hearing aids. I think that's actually going to just be a pathway into the independent audiologist door at the end. So it is going to be an introduction to some people to hearing aids, but those hearing aids are most likely not going to be sufficient in their daily environments. And that's where they will pursue seeing an actual independent audiologist. And I think that's where we as audiologists can also come into play, where we can educate and we can explain our value. Years ago, they started the whole over-the-counter reading glasses, and they still have those reading glasses, but those reading glasses are not sufficient for everyday environments. Yes, it's going to help them when they want to read, but it's very irritating to put on glasses, take them off, put on glasses, take them off. The same with over-the-counter hearing aids. I think that it's just going to open a door for us as audiologists just to explain the wonderful technology that's available. Also, the value of the independent audiologist, where we walk this road with these people, we understand the difficulties, and then we can recommend solutions for these difficulties.
Thanks, Trume. It has been wonderful talking to you. And I just want to say, and I'm not just saying it, that I can see the passion that you have in helping other people and improving their quality of lives. Again, I just want to mention what a great story that at 10 years old, it was pressed on your heart that this is something that, was a career path for you. And we are very glad at APPF to have you a part of this independent audiologists forum. It's great to have you. Thank you for what you're doing in other clients, patients, people's lives. Thank you for what you're doing in your family, and that you make the time as well to spend time with them, because you are only as strong for your patients as you are mentally strong as well. So thanks for building in that time as well and making sure that you are the best version of yourself that you can be. Thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it that you talked to us today.
Thank you, Sabrant. Thank you for having me. And it is such a privilege to be part of APPF and such a wonderful group. I think it has just enriched my life. It's so nice to have colleagues that are like-minded and such a good, wonderful network just to be part of. So thank you for your time as well.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Trume as well. We'll see you next time. Bye.